All right, APUSH, this is your Unit 2 study guide. As you can see at the top here, this is a really hard test. Okay, so you're warned now to put in the work right here. Okay, so first topic that we really need to know, and there are several questions about the French Indian War. You remember this war happens between 1754 and 1763. The French have come down from Canada. They've been moving into the Ohio River Valley. Meanwhile, the English colonists have been moving west. And so you get disputed territory. You get two nations that don't like each other anyway. They have a long history. And then you get trouble. And this is a war that is going to take place on two continents. It's going to take, it's going to be a war in Europe. It's going to be a war here in the North American continent. It starts off good for the French because they're using Native American ways. But when they change commanders and he starts forcing them to fight in more traditional ways, the British, who outnumbered the French probably 10-1, begin to win, as you can imagine. And for the Indians, they had sided with the French because they saw them as the lesser of two evils. The British were here in such huge numbers. The British were very land hungry, whereas the French were more about their fur trade, which was a little bit less invasive than the farming of the British. And so, it's going to be a British victory. And there's going to be a lot of consequences because of that victory. For one thing, Britain is going to get Canada, and Britain is going to get all of the land to the Mississippi River. But they're also going to get a mountain of debt. They're going to get a lot of debt that's hard for them to pay. And what they do to try to pay it off is going to set us down on the road to revolution. They passed the 1763 Proclamation Act, where settlers aren't supposed to move west of the Appalachian Mountains. The settlers are going to ignore that. So the British are going to have to, salutary neglect, as you can see, is the second term. It's over. Now Britain is firmly focused on what's going on in the colonies, and they're really desiring to get some of the money back. They view it as they have spent resources and money defending the colonists against the French in North America, so they're going to try to recoup some of their money. One of the ways that they do this, and one of the first ones that they do, is a tax called the Sugar Act. It's going to be a tax there on sugar. Incredibly unpopular tax with the colonists. It will eventually be repealed, but it's going to be replaced with the Stamp Act, which is even less popular. And that Sugar Act is, colonists were getting around the Sugar Act. They weren't allowed to buy molasses from the French and the Dutch and other peoples, but there was smuggling going on. And when they got caught, they got tried in a court of their peers, and they were typically found not guilty. And the British knew this. They knew what was going on. So they changed the rules where if you were found guilty of violating the Sugar Act, you're going to be tried in a Vice Admiralty court. So that's going to be a British-controlled court rather than one of your peers. And all of a sudden, these smugglers, who typically are people of note in the communities, are going to be found guilty. And that's a big problem. And so they're going to kick up a fuss. Remember, the revolution is really going to be an upper middle class and elite revolution. It's not a revolution of farmers by any means. Now, the Stamp Act, that's the tax that's going to be on more than 50 different professional documents, even newspapers, mayor's license. It's just a way to directly tax the colonists, which they've never really been directly taxed. And so they are furious. They're still paying less taxes than the people over in Britain, but it doesn't matter because they're used to a certain standard. And now that standard, their standard of living is going down, and they're not happy about it. And to be honest, they're probably a bit like a rebellious teenager who's huffing and puffing because dad has come back in and started to try to lay down the law after not giving a crap for a couple of years. There's a lot of that going on too. Now, the Stamp Act, they will kick up such a fuss. You're going to see the formation of the Sons of Liberty. You're going to have the stamp collectors' houses burned in effigies, and there's going to be a lot of destruction. And so the British are going to repeal it, and then make sure the colonists know that, hey, they can pass any law on the colonists that they want. Charles Townshend comes in as a prime minister. He's a disaster. And he has several different acts in his Townshend Acts. But he's smart enough to know that to get anywhere in the colonies, you're going to have to pay the British officials over here. And those British officials have been getting paid by the colonists. The colonists have been writing those checks. And you're not going to bite the hand that feeds. And he knows that. So they view that as a threat for sure, that he is going to pay British officials their checks. There's a lot of results in the early 1770s when all these acts are getting passed. The colonists are, probably their most effective means of resistance is economic boycotts. The British merchants, when colonists stop buying their stuff, they're putting the pressure on Parliament over in Britain to get something fixed because it's killing their economy. It's killing their pocketbook. So they're putting a lot of pressure on Parliament. And so that's probably the most effective means of resistance, although there was some riots and things like that and strongly worded letters. But more than anything else, it's the economic boycotts. And Parliament will end up repealing the Townshend Acts, just like they've repealed a lot of the other acts, except they do leave it on tea. And we know what's going to happen from that. So leave that tax on tea. And of course, they're going to try to bypass colonial merchants and sell directly to the colonists to save the colonists some money, but basically get rid of those colonial merchants who've been giving them problems. And that's not going to work. They're going to end up, the Sons of Liberty, which many of these merchants were a part of, are going to dress up as Indians, and they're going to go on those boats and they're going to dump like $1 million worth of tea in the Boston Harbor and then refuse to pay it when Britain says they're going to. And that's going to result in them shutting down Boston Harbor and declaring martial law. And that's really, and you're going to put British troops in Boston, and that's really going to ratchet up, the tension, without a doubt. So eventually, as the 1770s move on, we're going to finally get unity of some sort anyway. The First Continental Congress. And, there are sides that want, especially the South, that, hey, let's be cool. Doesn't affect the South as much, to be honest. It's everybody's looking out for themselves here. For the South, they don't want war with Britain. They buy from Britain. They're dependent on Britain. They don't make their own stuff. And they've been affected less by these taxes than New England has. New England they are ready for military operations. They are ready to unite. Remember, this is the home of the Patriots. The first Patriot cause is really in the Boston, New England area. And the middle colonies are kind of middle ground, really. They want to talk. They want to negotiate. They're not happy, but again, they're not quite as affected as the New England colonies are. That makes a lot of sense. And you're going to get some of them are founding fathers, such as Thomas Paine, who's famous for writing his Common Sense. And, and Common Sense is written in layman's terms. It's not difficult to pour through. An average farmer, if he's able to read, can understand it, or if someone reads it to him, he can understand it. It's not over his head. It's not a bunch of mumbo jumbo, if you will. And in it, he very clearly calls for independence and republicanism. He's looking for a new type of government. He's anti-monarchy. He's talking about an island can't rule a continent. It doesn't make sense, at least not to him. Now this is on paper, this is a titan versus a small child. When you look at the advantages that the British have, it's incredible. They have the largest land army. They have the greatest navy in the world. They're far richer than the colonies are, even with all the debt that they've been trying to pay back. They can get their hands on more money than the colonists can. And now, luckily for America, early on in the war, the first couple of years, Britain's more concerned with kind of flexing, thumping their chest a little bit to scare the colonists into backing off, showing them that they mean business, but they don't really want to fight. That's a drain of resources. They've just a decade earlier fought the French in a very bloody and expensive war. So they're trying to, basically scare tactics us into surrender. Really, the Revolutionary War is a war of attrition. We simply outlast the British will to fight. After the years of the Revolutionary War, they are just done with it. They're like, oh my gosh, just take your freedom already. Good grief. So keep that in mind. Now, we don't really focus on battles in AP, but there are a few that are key here. Of course, Lexington and Concord is the battle that starts the show, so it's good to know that. But really, the turning point is the Battle of Saratoga, and Saratoga is what's important about it is it convinces the French that we might actually have a shot. That if the French get involved, they can turn the tide in America's favor, and that will weaken their age-old enemy, Britain. So Saratoga is immensely important because without the French, we don't win this war. That's just simply the truth. Now, later on, as the years go by, eventually we would build up enough to get our independence. There's no doubt, but we certainly don't win it in the 1770s and 1780s without the French. Patriot women contribute quite a bit into this. They are making cloth that they didn't make before. We're not buying from Britain, we're boycotting Britain. And so they play a large role in there in making homespun cloth. They're making homemade tea. They're doing a lot of things, and they're kind of the backbone that when men leave the farm to go fight in the war, it's the women that's got to keep things rolling. Just like you'll see that theme in every war that we talk about. When men leave, women do the jobs that men did before, which is always funny why they think women can't do a man's job. They've proved it every single time we go to war. Now, we got to pay for this war, and we don't do it in a very smart way. We're going to basically just print the money, and we know that leads to gross inflation, and the paper, the Continentals, as they were called, are going to be basically worthless for the most part. We just can't get our hands on hard currency, and there's not a strong enough confederation to directly tax the states and raise the money that way. People aren't wanting to give up their money. We sort of don't trust each other. Another key event during the war, of course, was Valley Forge. And what's key about it is that it's George Washington at the head of the Continental Army. That's our professional army. It's not militia. And militia did a lot of good work in this war, but we needed a professional army if we were going to win and beat the British. And that's under the direction of George Washington. Well, Valley Forge is going to have a smallpox outbreak, very poor conditions. There's going to be deserters, but he somehow keeps his men together. And, that's what saves the day. It saves the war effort right there. Now, France, the Franco-American Alliance, as it's called, it's not one that you would expect to see. I mean, France is mostly Catholic. We are mostly Protestant. Have this long established monarchy, and here we are. We're trying to be a republic. And we just 10 years earlier, we fought France in the French-Indian War. So we are unlikely friends in this. But again, France is more than willing to help us if it hurts Britain. So that works for them, and it works for us. Now, in the Southern campaign, the British troops moving into the South, there's a lot more loyalists in the South. And, they're hoping to use them against us, against the colonists for sure. And that, one day they'd rule that territory that they'd come to capture. It just really doesn't work out that way for them. We would end up getting some really good guerrilla warfare in the South, and the South would play a large role in defeating the British. Now, the battle at the end of the war, very famously, is Yorktown. George Washington's going to be there, and the French finally show up, and we bottle Lord Cornwallis, the leader of the British troops. We bottle him up at Yorktown, and he's going to have to wave the white flag and surrender. It shocks the world. And George, speaking of George, his success as a general, he's not winning every battle. How can you imagine him to win all these battles against the powerhouse in the world? That's silly. He didn't have the men. He didn't have the resources. He didn't have the money. But his ability to keep up the morale of the people, he's somehow able to get something out of the States as far as support goes. He keeps the Continental Army together. He loses, but he loses smartly. These things, he's an amazing, charismatic figure who you can't look at his stats on paper and judge his success by that. There's a reason he's the father of our country. Now, the treaty that ends this war, and it takes 2 years to get the treaty. Yorktown happens in 1781. The Treaty of Paris is going to happen in 1783. So it takes about 2 years to get all the details hammered out. And there's going to be a lot going on there. Great Britain has to give up all of its land south of the Great Lakes. They're going to keep Canada. They'll get that. And, we're going to get land all the way to the Mississippi River, which is going to double the size of our new young country. We get fishing rights up north. Now, the only thing the British really get out of this is an agreement to protect loyalist property. And the colonists do not keep to their end of the bargain on that. They either take or destroy a lot of loyalist property. They're not very happy with the loyalists who they consider traitors. Ironically, the loyalists consider them traitors, and you can see it from all the perspectives there. So the first government that we're going to get following the Treaty of Paris is the AOC, the Articles of Confederation. It's a very loose, weak central government because we're frightened of a strong central government. Its biggest weakness, of course, is going to be that it can't tax. So the states hold most of the power in the states. Now that the big fight is over, the states go back to seeing themselves as, Virginians or New Yorkers, whatever it may be. So that's a bit of a problem. Now we've got some issues. We're going to try to get the Constitution ratified because after a decade or so of the Articles of Confederation, we realize we're never going to make it with that government. It's simply not strong enough. And so we have an issue. We have a Virginia plan. We have a New Jersey plan, a big state plan, a small state plan. The big state plan wants to go off of population. The small state plan wants to go one state, one vote, make it all equal. And so we get something called the Great Compromise. And the Great Compromise gives us two houses, bicameral. We get a House of Representatives, which is based off of population, and a Senate, which is one vote per state. And the Senate is slightly more powerful, the equality aspect of it, so that the big states don't tyrannize the small states. But the Great Compromise is going to help us move towards, this government, the Constitution that works. Now, we're not going to pass the Constitution without the Bill of Rights. Without a doubt, we have the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists are scared of this much power. The Bill of Rights is here. Do you feel better about it now? And they do. And the Bill of Rights protects freedom of speech and religion, of course, in the First Amendment. And it protects them against the government and really makes the Constitution legit. And, it talks about the balance between the states and the federal government. And that's what federalism is, the sharing of a central government and state power. Now, Alexander Hamilton is our guy. He's going to be the one who sets up our financial system and gets this country running and gets us moving towards, moving on. Because the war was almost the easy part. After the war, now what? Now you're building up a new country, and you've got this experimental country, and that's a big problem. And his financial plan, he wants to assume state war debts. He puts out excise taxes and revenue tariffs to protect local industries. The backbone of it is the national bank, the bus. He wants to do that. He's got to stabilize the currency, and he wants to pay off all Confederation securities at face value. These are all parts of his plan. Now, he's not going to get, there is a lot of resistance to his plan, especially in the South, and many of those people are Jeffersonians who don't like Hamilton anyway. So to get his plan passed, he says, hey, we can build a new capital and put it in the South. And that's going to be, of course, Washington, D.C. And so the South bites, they go for that, and they vote and accept Hamilton's financial plan. Now, Thomas Jefferson, again, these two men butt heads a lot early on because Jefferson has this agrarian vision of what the United States would be. All these Western territories, you've got, all these farm families, these yeoman farmers, middle-class farmers, not the planters, even though he's a planter and he's rich. He knows that you can't have a million rich people out there, but he sees a world dominated by farmers. And that's what he considers himself, is a farmer. Now, early on, we're going to get the Whiskey Rebellion. After the ratification of the Constitution because of a tax, the excise tax on whiskey. And whiskey was used as a currency in the backcountry often. And so they're upset about this. But when George shows up with the troops, the Whiskey Rebellion goes away real fast at the head of about 12,000 troops. And the Whiskey Rebellion is important because it shows that the national government, this new government under the Constitution, can respond to issues. Now, we still got some issues with Britain. They're still holding on to forts in Western territories that are supposed to be our sovereign territory. And so we send John Jay there to talk with them, and we get Jay's treaty. And people aren't happy with Jay's treaty. We got some maritime issues going out in the ocean as well. None of that goes in our favor. Really, the only thing we get out of Jay's treaty is that the British do have to withdraw from their forts in like the Northwest Territory, and they can't be helping the Indians. They were arming the Indians. They were hoping that the Indians could help bring down our new country and they could swoop in and take us back. Now, George had, of course, he is asked to be president. He's going to serve 2 terms, and then he's going to walk away. So then we really get our first election, and John Adams is going to narrowly beat Thomas Jefferson and become the second president of the United States. He's going to be a 1-term president because he's a thin-skinned jerk, to put it, bluntly. He's famous for his attempt to tyrannize, basically. He has the naturalization, the Alien and Sedition Acts. He doesn't like his enemies printing bad things about him in the newspaper. So that's going to be sedition. You're going to go to jail. Most of his enemies were new immigrants to the country. So he's going to say, hey, you got to be here for 14 years before you can be a citizen. And if you're not a citizen, I can put you on a boat and send you home. So that's a bit of an issue. So keep that in mind with John Adams. Not a real good, very important as a founding father, but not a very good president. Now, he's going to lose the second election, this time to Thomas Jefferson, who, strangely enough, served as his vice president. And Jefferson calls his election the Bloodless Revolution, the Revolution of 1800, because you had a change of political power and nobody had to get assassinated. Nobody died. It was peaceful. And that was very important to legitimizing the Constitution in our new young republic. Now, when Thomas Jefferson gets into office, it is, you've got a judiciary that is packed with Federalists. And remember, he's an anti-Federalist. And John Adams had packed it right before he left, but a lot of those didn't go through. The paperwork didn't go through in time, and Jefferson's wanting them all thrown out so he can get his guys in there. So you'll get the famous Marbury versus Madison case. And what Marbury versus Madison does is it legitimizes the Supreme Court, and it lets us know the Supreme Court can declare laws unconstitutional. If they see national law, no national law can be passed if it goes against the Constitution. So that gives basically the Judiciary Act, that gives the judicial branch more power, and it evens out our balance of power in our 3 branches. Now, Jefferson was a strict constructionist. He believed in literally following the Constitution because, remember, he feared it being too powerful. But in the early part of his term, Napoleon is struggling against Britain. He needs to sell off some land and get some money. And so he offers the Louisiana Territory to Thomas Jefferson for just an amazingly low price, $15 million. And Thomas Jefferson, he gets attacked by his enemies who call him a hypocrite. He simply cannot pass up the deal of life, the deal of humanity here. It's probably the greatest land purchase in human history. And so he is going to do the Louisiana Purchase. And of course, he's going to get Lewis and Clark. He's going to dispatch them to go on this scientific and exploratory journey to, write down and track this new territory that doubles the size of America yet again, gives us something like 20 plus states, including the great state of Arkansas. So his first 4 years is really good, Jefferson's is. Now, his second term is not. His second term is the opposite, and it's because of his Embargo Act. Britain and France aren't treating us very good, so he says, I'm not playing your games, and we're not trading with you guys. It crushes the economy. Exports are dying off, and people are losing money and losing livelihoods, and they are furious. All right, so he comes in with a bang, but he leaves with a whimper. Thomas Jefferson does. Now, just a few short years later, under the term of James Madison, who will replace Thomas Jefferson, we'll get another Virginian in there. We get the War of 1812. Federalists don't want it. Others are spooling for a fight. Even when we have a chance not to go to the war, we decide we're going to. We've been disrespected. It doesn't go real great for us. The Canadians repulse us from our invasion of Canada on land. We do beat the British because they're fighting Napoleon, so they only send a couple ships over, and we have some good victories against the British at sea. But the British will end up burning our capital, and we have some losses on land here to the British. However, our greatest victory will come actually a little bit after the war is over at the Battle of New Orleans under the leadership of Andrew Jackson. And that really kind of gives us the pride that we needed for going forth out of the War of 1812. When we talk about the Supreme Court, the first Supreme Court justice member is John Marshall. And so Supreme Court justice members serve for life. And so the entire time, and he's there for a long time, the entire time he's there, that's known as the Marshall Court. And his decisions that he would pass on would uphold the principle of the supremacy of national laws over state laws. A state law cannot go against a national law. So it's very important. And judicial review, like I talked about earlier, Marbury versus Madison is the first time that we're going to see that put to the test. Now, the Bank of the United States, we had a bit of an issue with the Bank of the United States. People saw it as dangerous and were enemies of the Bank of the United States. Its charter expired in 1811, and it wasn't renewed. Now, eventually, a second Bank of the United States would be chartered, a couple years later. But we had some issues in the beginning. But we needed the Bank of the United States. It was important. Now, in 1819, we get something known as the Panic of 1819. And it's because we're an agricultural economy. We got a lot of agriculture as one of our big trading items. And you had this huge drop in worldwide agricultural prices. It's similar to what will happen in the Great Depression. So the Panic of 1819 is a steep recession. It's not quite a depression, but it makes times kind of lean in America for a little bit. That's just part of the boom and bust cycle. We're going to have ups. We're going to have downs. That's part of capitalism. Between 1780s and 1820, America begins to change, and you begin to see the creation of a national market. We've got a large workforce. People are willing to come out of the farms and go to these growing towns and cities where they begin to work in factories. We know from world history, the Industrial Revolution, it's finally come to America in the early 1800s. Usually known as the Second Industrial Revolution. It's come to America, and it is going to change us dramatically. It's going to be one of the main things that creates us into a large power. You get some, rural manufacturing, New England farmers. You're supposed to be growing livestock and sheep and wool. There's a lot of environmental damages because of the Second Industrial Revolution. Farm families are, they used to make everything themselves, churn their own butter, slaughter their own pigs. Now you're going to the market, you're going to town to buy what you need. That's part of the market economy, the market revolution, as it's known. And parents and children are working even longer and harder than their ancestors had. And that's pretty crazy. The market revolution is going to set off a transportation revolution. We got to get goods to the market, and you're going to see that on roads. You're going to see it in canals. Water transport early on is the easiest way to get goods to market. But eventually, in the 1830s and 40s, with the invention of locomotives and trains, it will take over. But in the beginning, it's definitely water. Canals is the big deal. And America's different. One of the biggest differences with America is that if you're a hard worker and you have an ability, it can get you somewhere in America. You can be born poor and die rich. It is not that way throughout most of the world. America really is different, and word of that spreads. And America from this time period until today becomes the most popular destination for immigrants. The American dream. People come over here and they get a fresh start. It doesn't always work out for them, but there's a lot of success stories of people risking everything to come across the Atlantic and start over here in America. And it's one of the things that makes us great. um, and by 1800, socially speaking, parents have lost a lot of their leverage over their children. Land holdings are a lot smaller, and they've been dividing their land holdings amongst their children. And so they simply can't make their children, they can't choose their partners for them like they used to. Now the son's like, what are you going to do? I'm going to choose who I want to marry. And so people begin marrying for love, and that'll kind of usher in this age of sentimentalism. Down here, sorry. It'll usher in this age of sentimentalism where people are marrying for love, and that it's a great thing for America. And it's not something that's just going to happen in just America. It is kind of a European phenomenon as well, for sure. And also in this time period with sentimentalism, we get the rise of something called the Republican motherhood. The poor women are going to get basically told to stay in the kitchen. Your job is to cook, clean, and educate the children because you're morally better than the men, and you're better at teaching the children than the men. So you should do that. Don't worry about politics. We'll do that. Oh, that's nasty business. You don't need any of that. You stay at home. And so the women, they're going to be stuck out of politics for a while here. Education. Really before the 1820s, remember, the rich people have all the advantages. They're going to tutor their children. The people who are getting the education are going to get the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. The farmers don't see any use in high school. Go get your basics and then get your butt back out here on the farm, because that's free labor. That's why farmers have large families, because that's free labor for them to work on the farm. And all they have to pay them is food, and so that works for them. In this early 1800 time period, you get Noah Webster, and he's famous for basically creating a dictionary. He wants conformity, because Americans are spelling words differently in different areas. They're writing their grammar different ways. He wants to standardize American language, basically. Early on, the South has a lot of political clout. Washington's from Virginia. Thomas Jefferson's from Virginia. James Madison's from Virginia. James Monroe's from Virginia. So you have all these presidents who are from the South. The capital's in the South. The South is very rich with their plantations. Early on, it's the richer region. They got a lot of senators as well. Now, slavery is now rearing its ugly head. It's been there, but it's kind of been in the backdrop. And now that we're settled as a country, and we don't have to worry about Britain or anybody coming in and stealing us from ourselves, now we've got to deal with each other. And so slavery has become an issue. It's banned in the North. The South doesn't want new territories becoming slave-free, because they're worried that slavery will be voted out in the South. So our boy Henry Clay, the great compromiser, is going to show up again. He never leaves. He dies at like 180 years old, and he's always in politics, so he never leaves. He's still there, and this time he comes up with another compromise called the Missouri Compromise, where below Missouri, any new territory below Missouri will come in as a slave state. And any territory above the Missouri line, except for Missouri. Missouri's going to be a slave state, but the rest of them will come in as free states. So make sure you know that the Missouri Compromise is going to be around for a while before it gets repealed and doesn't work. But for all the future states from the Louisiana Purchase coming in, they're going to be subject to the rules of the Missouri Compromise. All right, guys. That's your test. It's doable. It's a lot of information. You got to keep things straight. You got to see the flow of what's going on here in American history. This move from we hate you taxing us. You know what? we're just done with you. Let's fight a war. We get lucky because the British get tired of fighting it. It's expensive. The French join in. That sucks for Britain. And so they help win our independence for us. But of course, couldn't have been done without us too. Then we're going to struggle with the government, the Articles of Confederation. It's not going to work very well because it's weak. So we're going to need a stronger government. We're scared, but we get the Bill of Rights. So sure, let's do this thing. And it works. The Constitution works. And we grow more powerful thanks to Alexander Hamilton's financial plans. We have some ups and downs. We have a War of 1812, but hey, it worked out pretty good. At worst, a draw for us, perhaps even a victory. And that means that Britain's never going to get us back. We don't have to worry about that. We will always be our own country. You can't take us out. You will see the growth of American culture. The second industrial revolution comes in and rejuvenates our nation and begins to make us richer. And then we try to become better Americans, basically. Women get stuck in the home, but at least you're getting to marry for love. So, there's some good stuff there. All right, guys, I hope this helps you on your test. It's going to take a lot of work on your part to be successful here, but I know you can do it.